I don't believe that the MCU is 616. As much as Kevin Feige can make us think that it's 616, it is 199999.
I like this one.
How you doing, guys? Welcome back to Rewind Reviews. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different than what we normally do. We're going to be doing a TV series today, so what we're going to be talking about today is the first season of Miss Marvel. The 6-part mini-series, exclusive to Disney Plus, sees Captain Marvel superfan Kamala Khan struggling to fit in both at school and at home, until one day she discovers a mysterious bangle that grants her special powers like the heroes that she looks up to. This is another 6-part mini-series that takes place within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They've really been knocking these out, haven't they? But honestly, I kind of forgot that this was one of the upcoming ones that was supposed to be coming out this year. When it comes to the Miss Marvel character, I'm not too familiar with her. I'm sort of aware of her origin. I'm aware of like her being an Inhuman. She has similar abilities to Miss Fantastic. I'm aware of her being a Muslim teenager who lives in New York. There's a few little aspects here and there that I am aware of, but in regards to like the character as a whole, I'm nowhere near as familiar with her as I am with like Spider-Man. So I wasn't too excited when they announced that they were going to be doing a TV series with her front and centre, but it did get me interest. I was kind of curious to see what it was that they were going to do with her, because I do think that she does have a lot of potential as a character, and I think as a lead as well. The trailers also sort of gave me a bit more of a better idea of what sort of show that we were going to be getting, because it did seem like this was going to be quite a nice change of pace from everything that we have been getting within the MCU up until this point, because No Way Home, Moon Knight, Doctor Strange, they've all been quite deep and dark, and they've had those moments where they can turn into like horror shows and movies. So it was quite nice having a show that did seem like it was going to be a bit more light-hearted and a bit more fun. It also seems to be that like it was sort of aimed towards maybe like a more younger age group, which I can understand why some people were sort of put off by that initially, but honestly this is actually pretty good. Before we go any further, I just need to mention that this is going to contain spoilers, but I'm going to save that until after I've given my rating, so I'll make sure to give you plenty of heads up before I start getting into that. So starting off with Kamala Khan herself. Kamala is played by Iman Vellani, who honestly is perfect for this role. And actually I was really surprised that this is actually like the first acting gig that she's ever had, and honestly you'd never know it. It definitely helps that it is a role that does seem quite similar to herself, because I have seen a lot of her interviews leading up to the show. It's one of the reasons that sort of got me quite interested, because she genuinely seems like she really does care, and she does have a lot of passion towards the Marvel Universe, and honestly, that definitely got my attention, so I really did want to see what it was that she could bring to this role, and she is really good. I'd even go so far as to say she's one of the best things in this show. When it comes to the rest of the cast that are featured throughout the show, honestly there's no weak points at all. Everybody is genuinely really good in their roles. The writing for the characters can be a bit mixed here and there, but overall the performances from every single person who is involved, they are really good. These are including Matt Lintz, Zenobia Shroff, Yasmin Fletcher, Rish Shah, Mohan Kapoor, Sagar Sheikh and Nimra Booker. Everybody is genuinely really good in this movie, especially the pair. I love the parents in this series, because their relationship, their connection with Kamal, and the way that they perform with Iman, the way that they are with each other, it is really great, and I really do love what it is that they do with their roles. This is a superhero show, this is set within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so of course there are a lot of villains that are included in this, and there's a good mix of different kinds of antagonists, because the main primary one that we have are the clandestines, which are like these beings that exist from another dimension that's like parallel to our own through something called the Veil, and they sort of take over as like the central antagonists throughout most of this series, whereas we also have Damage Control, who we've seen sort of popping up every now and then from the Spider-Man movies, and they're basically the guys who are like in charge of like cleaning up the mess, and they've kind of taken on a bit like a task force role in this, so there is a really good sort of mix of the two different antagonists. And there are some interesting ideas when it comes to the clandestines, because there is a lot of backstory, there is a lot of stuff that they can sort of get into and address, but they don't really actually go into it that much. They do sort of explain where they come from and why they're sort of stuck on Earth, but that's really it. We don't really sort of know much more about them, to the point where honestly I didn't really care, which is a shame, because I do genuinely like performances, and I think that some of the abilities that they have are actually quite a nice sort of contrast to Kamala, and I think that the sequences where they sort of face off are actually quite interesting. I think that her relationship and her connection to them is really interesting, but I just don't think it's developed enough to really be as interesting as it really could be. And then when it comes to damage control, I think their inclusion is pretty good, and I like the agents that they have front and centre, but there's no real threat from them. At least on my part, I don't feel like there is enough sort of threat that comes from them. Again, I like the performances, I like the sequences, I just don't think it's as investing as it really could be. It also doesn't help that there's so much backstory that they do sort of hint at and they do try and address, but they don't really go there. And it's this really big concept that they're trying to introduce into this series, and it's another sort of big seismic change to the MCU, and we've had so many of them over phase 4 that it's really hard to try and get your head around all these different concepts. I feel like what they should have done in this series is have like a small group of villains who are very grounded, like maybe like the Wrecking Crew or something like that, but having them sort of be more grounded, more rooted to Kamala's area. And because she's getting quite overexcited and she's trying to sort of go out and help people and stop muggers and crime and all sorts, that she keeps interfering with their plans and their crimes to the point where it's like, right, she's getting in the way, we've got to try and get rid of her. That to me would have worked a little bit better for the way that this series is kind of established, because I feel like that needed to be what the story was. Because there's a lot you can really do in 6 episodes, and I feel like 6 is definitely the right amount for this kind of show. But the issue is, it gets very sidetracked, because the first 3 episodes are more or less what I was wanting to see. But then 4 and 5, Kamala and her mum end up going to visit her gran, and they basically take like this big trip all the way over across the world, and it just sidetracks from everything that's gone on. It just doesn't feel like it's even really sort of part of the same series. And then it gets to episode 6 and then everything's back to where it was in the first 3 episodes, and it just felt like it was so disconnected from everything else that had happened, especially episode 5, which I really don't understand why they needed to really sort of go there, because it's a flashback episode, but it's the entire sort of backstory that we're already aware of. We sort of know what's happened at this point, so it doesn't really add much more to what we already know. There is like a time loop sort of element that's added into it, but to me it just didn't feel like it really fit within what this show needed to be, because to me it just needed to be like this really small scale thing. And I think throwing in like all this other stuff and time travel and all this, it's too much. I feel like what this show should have been all the way through is focused on Kamala becoming this hero, because I feel like what they could do is have, yeah, she is obsessed with superheroes, especially Captain Marvel, and she wants to be like them, and then when she actually does get superpowers, off she goes out into the world. She wants to try and help people, she wants to go and do good things, but she gets in way over her head, and she doesn't really realise that the actions that she's taking does have consequences, that she isn't really taking the responsibility that she needs to when she has these kind of abilities. You know, there's a lot of echoes of Spider-Man in here, because I do feel like there are a lot of parallels between the 2 characters. I feel like it would work really well for her character. She's one of those rare characters in the MCU that has a secret identity, but spoilers, it like kind of gets taken away. And I feel like that sort of ruins a lot of potential that they could have with this series, especially with a lot of like conflict and friction that's sort of built up with her and her parents, because they obviously know something's going on and they don't really sort of trust her enough. And I feel like that would have been a really great angle for them to have really explored, because where like Spider-Man is now in the MCU, you can't do that. So I feel like having that story with Kamala might actually work a little bit better, and you can have a lot more time to do it. But those are just really my thoughts, and it's something that I do tend to do if there's a show or a movie that I wasn't quite on board with, and I start thinking, oh, what would I change for this? So that's just kind of what I do, so let me know if you agree or not. When it comes to her costume and how it's portrayed in live action, I absolutely love how they brought this into the MCU. One thing I have not been able to fault in Phase 4 are the costumes, because honestly they've all been knocked out the park. They're all absolutely brilliant, and I think the Miss Marvel one's definitely one of the best ones. I also really like how it's kind of built up over the course of the series. So you see her very early on in like this really dodgy Captain Marvel cosplay costume, and as the series goes on she starts like getting the scarf, she starts getting the mask, and then eventually the costume. I really do like that sequence where she actually does have her costume for the first time, and you see like the people like seeing her like racing past them. It's a really good sequence, and I love how that sort of feels. But that brings me on to my next thing. One of the biggest complaints that I saw before this show was even released, like as soon as the marketing really sort of began with all the pictures and everything, was that Miss Marvel's powers were going to be completely different from the comics, to the point where she isn't even going to be an Inhuman. She gets her powers from this bangle that she finds, which does sort of harken back to like the Captain Marvel days. But when it comes to what it is that they're trying to do with her abilities in this show, it does kind of come across as a bit of a Green Lantern-esque. And I don't really think it does enough to really justify just how big of a change this actually is. Because that's one of the big issues with the villains, because they are tied to this bangle, and I don't know if this is in the comics or whether it's being adapted in some way, shape or form, but as far as I'm aware, it's not actually the case. So it has kind of been created for this show, because it's not necessarily just like a power change, it's like a lot of her identity's kind of formed around this because of what I'm sort of aware of in the comics and how her powers sort of tie into how she feels, how she sees herself. That's kind of a big part of her character, so changing that completely removes that element. As I said, I just don't feel like it really does enough to really sort of justify this. The only thing I can possibly think of as to why they needed to change the powers as much as they did is A, they're not going to be including any humans in the MCU, and B, I think they needed something a bit more cosmic so that when she eventually teams up with Captain Marvel and Photon, I feel like that might actually work a little bit better than just a young girl with stretchy powers. But I do find it quite funny that one of the things that the show are doing is that whenever she needs to get somewhere, she uses like these platforms where she's like shoots out like little things that she can step on and run across. Even though I do think it is visually quite interesting, it is something a little bit different than what we've seen in the past. It did make me wonder, does that mean that she has to run everywhere? It was like a crime going on a few blocks away, so she springs into action and she races along, and then as soon as she gets down into the alleyway to stop the muggers, she jumps down and... It made more sense if like she could like jump on a train or a bus or something, or like even like taxis or something, which I think could be quite a funny thing. I mean, even Spider-Man with his web sling, and even he like jumps on the train from time to time. She is still human at the end of the day, so I do think that having a bit more of a logical way for her to get around might be an idea that they need to consider. When it comes to the action that's featured in this series, I think it is handled well. I do think that what they try doing with the different abilities and different skill sets and all that, it does work very well. I do think that it is mostly kept quite grounded, mostly. When it comes to a lot of like Kamala's action sequences, you can tell that she is definitely out of her depth and she is just kind of like improvising, and I think that does work, and I do think it does sort of add a lot to her character, especially when it comes to like the bigger sequences. And I've got to mention, I do like how some of these episodes are directed, because there are definitely influences of things like Scott Pilgrim, and they have admitted that Scott Pilgrim was actually a big influence on it, especially like a lot of like the camera movements, and like when she's like lying down on a couch and like the camera sort of like follows her around. It's really interesting. I think visually it is a really great show. It is still an MCU project, so there is definitely a lot of comedy that is added into this, and I feel like this is one of the few times where I feel like the comedy really has kind of worked well for what they were trying to do. You know, that's one thing that has kind of become a bit of a problem. It's been an issue for quite a few of the MCU movies, and I feel like especially now with things like Thor Love and Thunder and like Multiverse of Madness, the comedy can get in the way a little bit, and I feel like it doesn't always work, especially when you have different subject matter. When it comes to Miss Marvel, it does work quite well because it fits the tone. It knows when to have a laugh and it knows when to hold off and be a bit more serious. It is a really hard thing to balance at times, because you know, you want to try and be entertaining, but at the same time you also want to properly get into things and address things. And that's one of the reasons why I really love the parents in this, because they kind of capture this really well. There are serious elements to them, especially with the way that they interact with Kamala, but then there are times where they're just together by themselves, and you, like Kamala can like hear them like messing around downstairs, and that's good. That does work very well. And then even like one of the her dads is going to take her to the Avenger Con event, and he's dressed up like the Hulk to the point where he's wearing like full green face paint and everything. I've got a friend who's actually done something quite similar to that, and he was yellow for about 3 days. But yeah, overall the comedy does work quite well. I don't think it's the funniest thing that they've done. I don't think the humour's always really sort of funny, but it does help lighten the mood quite a bit. Right, now we're getting on to the awkward part, and that is the effects. Overall, I do think that most of the effects are actually pretty good, and I do think they work quite well for the show, especially when it comes to like the CG doubles of Kamala when she's like running around. I don't know how much of that was actually her in like a green room or how much of it was actually a 3D double. That's good. If I can't tell what it was that they actually did, I think that is when the effects actually do work. There are definitely a few sequences that could have been tweaked, that definitely could have been a little bit better. I think the way that they portray her abilities looks a little bit odd, and I don't know whether that's just because of how they're supposed to look or whether it's because the effects weren't quite right for them. I'm not quite sure. They do look a bit strange, but it doesn't take you out of the situation. But then there are a few instances where the effects just don't quite look as good, and it's like a sequence in the first episode where they're at Avengers Con and things are getting a little bit out of hand, and there's like a gigantic Mjolnir attached to the ceiling, and it comes undone and comes swinging down, and it ends up hitting somebody, and it just does not look real at all. But then there's a lot of like other little effects here and there that honestly are really inventive, and I haven't really seen anything really like it outside of stuff like Sherlock, and that's like text messages and emails, because what they do is they use the environment to kind of show what it is that people are saying on like the phones. So they've got like the stars all sort of shift into like what it is that's being said, or they've got like signposts behind them that are all sort of lighting up with emojis and all sorts. And then there's like sequences where Kamal is like talking about her plans, and she uses chalkboards and all the artworks moving around, a bit like what they did in Legion. That's really good, and I think that really does work for the tone that they're trying to go for. It definitely adds to the comic book elements to it. But yeah, there are definitely a few effects that just could have been tweaked here and there. And you know, if you've been following the news quite recently, at the time of this being recorded and released, there have been a lot of reports about the VFX artists that are working with Marvel Studios, about them being very unhappy with deadlines, being overworked, being underpaid. Honestly, it's made so much sense as to why I don't think the effects have looked quite as good as they could have. Going all the way back to like the days of Iron Man, those effects still hold up. Like the Hulk effects in the first Avengers movie, he looks absolutely incredible. But then comparing that to like the Jackal from Moon Knight, and then there's a few things in Thor Love and Thunder as well, it's just no contest. It's just, they just don't look as good, and it's definitely because of the time. There's so many projects that Marvel are working on now. It used to be just 2 movies a year, then it got bumped up to 3, and now we're getting 4 movies a year plus 5 TV shows, and it's all the same team. Honestly, I don't blame them for speaking up, because this is a really tricky situation. The audience will take quality over quantity any day, and I do feel like Marvel do need to back off just how much that they are actually producing. As long as they are still able to be good, I don't think that anyone would have a problem with them reducing how much is coming out. I do have a bit of a background with VFX. I do have a little bit of experience with not necessarily the industry, but the workload, the pace that you've got to work at. So honestly, it is really bad that we are actually seeing that, no, this is genuinely how the industry is. So I really do hope that it does get sorted out eventually, because honestly it really needs to. Well, let's get back to this show, shall we? When it comes to the music that they've used in throughout the series, I think it's not really my cup of tea, but it does fit very well into what it is that they're trying to do. There is a bit of an Indian sort of influence to it, as well as a bit more of a cinematic, like big orchestra kind of thing that they've gone for, and it works really well. It's balanced really well. Like the main theme that you hear in the credits, I really do like. It may not necessarily be like as memorable as like the Avengers themes or anything like that, but if you heard this theme, then I think you would more than likely know what it was from. And my feelings are actually quite similar to when it comes to a lot of the songs that they've used throughout this show, because again, they're not really my cup of tea. I think there's only like 1 or 2 songs I actually like that they actually do use in this, but they do fit what it is that they're trying to do. They do fit the sequences where they use, especially like that sequence where she's finally got a costume. I actually do like how they used the song in that, but yeah, they're not really my cup of tea. You know, that actually just reminded me, because one of the things that they did in the marketing for this series is they used a song called Blinded by the Lights for the trailers, and that's what sort of led me to believe about what the series was going to be. That's kind of why I thought that it was going to be all about Kamala kind of getting in over her heads, and that's kind of what I thought by like Blinded by the Light. So that's why I thought they chose that song. But no, it's just because her powers are hard light. Yeah, anyway, overall I do think this is a pretty good show. I do think that there is a lot of potential for it. Some of it is utilised, and it is utilised well. Some of it is kind of wasted, and there is a bit of a mixture of those elements. The cast, the performances, the aesthetic, the settings, all that stuff is genuinely really good. It's just a few elements that you do add into this that I just don't feel really work as well. There are definitely issues with a few of the effects, and as I said, it needs more time. The backstory when it comes to the villains, I don't really find them very threatening. I don't really find them too interesting because they don't really sort of delve into it too much, and I don't really feel like it's something that they are going to be exploring going forwards. Maybe they will, but who knows at this point. I had fun with it. I did genuinely enjoy watching it, and it was something that I was looking forward to seeing each week. When it comes to like the general audience, for instance, I think this is going to be a bit of a mixed bag for people. Some people are definitely going to enjoy it, some people probably not going to. Honestly, I would recommend checking it out. It might not be for you, but just at least give it a try. So with all that being said, my rating for the show, season 1 of Miss Marvel, is going to be a 7 out of 10. As I said, general audiences, I think this might be a little bit mixed for you, but I feel like for fans of Marvel in general, I do think that this is something that is a little bit more important than you might think, so do check it out. If you are a fan who is somebody who has been following the MCU up until this point, give it a go. So now that that's out of the way, what I'm going to start doing now is I'm going to go into a few little spoilery things that I did want to address, I do want to talk about, but I didn't really want to sort of mention it just in case you haven't actually seen the show. So if you haven't seen it, go away, go check it out, come back and you can see this bit. So really there's two big things that this show does. There's very big setups for things that are going to be happening, and there's a very big revelation in this series that I don't think anyone was really expecting. So first off, what we get is a very brief cameo from Captain Marvel, played by Brie Larson. The scene kind of confused me a little bit because I'm not alone in this apparently. I thought that she had like transformed into, and I thought it was going to be like a reference to the comics, but no, apparently they've like swapped places, and it was directed by the woman who is actually directing the Marvels movie. Out of the movies that we have got coming up, it's not the one that I've been really looking forward to the most. I didn't really enjoy the first Captain Marvel, and I just don't really find the character really that interesting. But with Kamala being included now and what they've done with her in this show, I'm a little bit more interested purely because of her. There isn't really too much of an idea of what the movie is going to be about. I mean, there's theories around it being like some sort of like secret invasion style thing, which it could be, but I'm not quite sure because we are getting the Secret Invasion TV series, so it doesn't really make sense to have another one doing the same thing. There is a theory going around that the bangle that Kamala's got is actually connected to the 10 rings that were in Shang-Chi. It is referenced in the show. I think there is actually a reference to the 10 rings somewhere, and there is a similarity to the way that they look, so maybe that's where everything's heading. But honestly, there's nothing's actually come out about the movie, so I'm really curious to see what it is that they do have planned and where it is that they are planning on going. If I had my way, I'd have Rogue in it and I'd have her as like the main villain, but I don't think that's happening. But it's not just set up for the Marvels that we get, and I've just kind of given it away there. One thing that they do actually reveal in this show, which again, nobody was actually expecting them to actually go there. There is a sequence where Kamala is talking to Bruno, and it's something that's been sort of built up over the course of the series, because you're trying to sort of figure out what it is that she is and how she's connected to the bangle, because he keeps saying that her energy is kind of different and there's something odd. I didn't really know what it was that they were going to do. I did kind of expect them to actually say Inhumans, but I thought, well, they're not going to include the Inhumans in the MCU, so what is it that they're doing? And then eventually there's a little talk where he says that it seems as though you're going through some sort of mutation, and I didn't catch this the first time, but in the background there is actually a few notes of the X-Men theme, the cartoon series. So ladies and gentlemen, we finally have mutants in the MCU. As I said, this really wasn't expected. I mean, I'm sure there were hints earlier on in the show, but honestly it was so unexpected, and especially when it comes to like her powers, because that could have actually been a bit of a giveaway, because there is a mutant in the X-Men comics called, I think it's called Armor, and she does have very similar looking powers. So, and they've even said that that is actually a bit of an influence on it as well. But yeah, Kamala Khan is officially a mutant, and she is the first official mutant in the MCU. I know people have been saying that, oh, Professor X, because he showed up in Doctor Strange, but the thing is, that's not the MCU universe, you know, the 199999999, not 616. So it is great that we are starting to get mutants within this continuity, because for anyone who isn't really sort of aware of what was going on behind the scenes, very early on, I think it might have been like the 90s, Marvel Comics had to sell off a lot of their movie rights to different studios in order to basically stop themselves from going bust, and that was like Spider-Man and Blade and all sorts getting sold off to Sony Pictures and Ghost Rider, and then we had like Fantastic Four and X-Men, Daredevil, all those characters all getting bought by 20th Century Fox. So Marvel only really had the Avengers, so all the movies that are being produced by Marvel Studios have all been Avenger focused ones, whereas 20th Century Fox been pumping out like the X-Men and Fantastic Four movies, you know, some of them being great, some of them really not. And then Sony still own Spider-Man and all of his characters. That's why we're getting so many villain movies now, which I'm not on board with. But since Disney have actually managed to buy both Marvel and 20th Century Fox, it now means that those characters can exist in the MCU, and that's kind of where Doctor Strange came into this, because that was the first official time that we have actually had Avengers, Inhumans, Fantastic Four, mutants, all these characters actually in the same universe. So when it comes to the X-Men, when it comes to like Deadpool and mutants in general, I am very curious and kind of cautious about how it is that they are going to be fitting into the MCU, because I don't know how they're going to sort of fit in, because the way that the X-Men mutants are all sort of portrayed in the comic and even in the Fox movies to various degrees, the status quo that mutants have with humans I don't think is going to work very well in the MCU, because case in point, we've got things like Avengers Endgame, where we've got kids running up to Professor Hulk in a restaurant asking for a selfie. Nobody's like scared of them or anything, so having the X-Men being involved in the MCU, I don't know if people are really going to be the way that they are in the comics, and I don't feel like it's going to work as well. There are ways around it, and I do think that one idea that I've had is maybe they already have like the early First Class sort of era X-Men, who are a team who are sort of known to the public, but they sort of keep out of the way as much as they can. But one of the things that they end up doing is they're trying to stop like a kid who's like got powers that are beyond their control. They don't really know how to control anything, so the X-Men go to try and help the kid, and the powers get too out of control, and there's just like this massive like catastrophe, and the X-Men mutants are blamed for it. And I feel like that would work quite well, and it would sort of drive a wedge between humans and mutants. They're probably not going to go in that direction, but that's just one idea that I've had. But yeah, I am really curious, I am excited, I am cautious about how they're going to integrate mutants and the X-Men and everyone into the MCU. I am looking forward to Deadpool 3, which, as far as I'm aware, is actually going to be a direct sequel to the first two movies, and honestly I feel like that will work really well. I believe the writing team for that movie are the exact same ones that worked on Deadpool 2, so honestly I am really looking forward to seeing what it is that they bring to that and how Deadpool fits into the MCU. He really does work very well, and I think that having him sort of being ripped out of the Fox universe and put in the MCU, I think could be a really great idea. So that's pretty much everything that I've got to say for today, so thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought about the series down below. If you have any thoughts or theories around where things are going, do you have any sort of ideas around what they should do with the Marvels, with mutants, with the Avengers, please like, please subscribe, hit the notification button to keep up to date on everything going on this channel. I'm also available on Facebook, where I just sort of keep you updated with a few little tidbits and links to the videos. Also, keep meaning to say, if you do have any suggestions for films, games, TV shows that you'd like me to have a look at, and that if I've got access to, if I've got time, I will get round to them as soon as I can. So let me know those down below in the comments. Keep an eye out for more Marvel content that's going to be on this page. The next video that I've got coming out is going to be Thor Love and Thunder, so keep an eye out for that one. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time on Rewind Reviews. See you guys.